Something is happening right now in Washington that most Americans don't even know about yet, and the people who do know about it didn't think it would happen this fast. H.R. 38, the bill that could fundamentally reshape how every single gun owner in this country travels, carries, and exercises their Second Amendment rights, just moved forward with a speed that has left both supporters and critics scrambling. We're talking about nationwide pistol carry reciprocity, the kind of change that ends the insane patchwork system where you can be a law-abiding citizen in your driveway and a felon 2 counties over. This isn't speculation anymore. This isn't some distant policy debate. This is February 2026, and the new pistol rules that could apply in all 50 states are closer to reality than they've ever been. So let me be clear about what we're dealing with here, because the implications touch every gun owner, every traveler, every parent who carries legally, and every trucker who crosses state lines for a living. The question isn't whether you care about gun rights. The question is whether you're ready for what happens when the entire framework gets rewritten. For more than 20 years, H.R. 38 sat on the shelf collecting dust, a nice idea that politicians could talk about during election season, but never actually had to defend or implement. It was safe. It was theoretical. It let lawmakers pander to their base without risking anything real. But something changed, and it didn't change because one party decided to make a move or because one headline dominated the news cycle. It changed because pressure built up from every possible direction until the old system couldn't hold anymore. You've got truckers getting arrested for carrying a firearm across state lines, people who aren't criminals, who passed background checks, who followed every rule their home state required, but the moment they cross an invisible border, they're facing felony charges. You've got parents who carry legally at home, who've never committed a crime, who suddenly find themselves breaking laws they didn't even know existed just because they drove their kids to visit family 2 states away. You've got federal judges, the people who are supposed to interpret and uphold the Constitution, openly admitting that the current patchwork system places an unreasonable burden on constitutional rights, but then claiming their hands are tied because the framework is what it is. And you've got 24 attorneys general, the top law enforcement voices in nearly half the country, telling Congress directly that the system is broken beyond repair. These aren't activists. These aren't lobbyists. These are the people responsible for enforcing laws in their states, and they're saying the current structure doesn't work. Add to that a Supreme Court that has taken a much stronger, much clearer stance on Second Amendment protections over the past few years, and a political climate where millions of gun owners are demanding clarity instead of confusion, and you start to understand why the old framework simply couldn't survive. Congress didn't choose to rewrite pistol rules because they wanted to start a fight. They were forced into it by reality, by the accumulation of injustices, by the weight of a system that punishes good people for trying to exercise their rights. And that's exactly why H.R. 38 is now impossible to ignore. What happened next wasn't slow, and it wasn't quiet. The moment H.R. 38 hit the floor of Congress, the entire political landscape shifted like someone had pulled a fire alarm in the middle of the night. And the shockwave didn't start with committee hearings or policy papers. It started with power, with influence, with the kind of backing that turns a bill from a proposal into a priority. When former President Trump publicly threw his support behind nationwide reciprocity, every reporter, every lawmaker, every legal analyst in Washington realized the conversation had just changed. This wasn't symbolic. This wasn't a tweet that would fade into the noise. Trump's endorsement moved H.R. 38 straight into the center of the national fight over gun rights, and suddenly, millions of gun owners who had been dealing with confusing reciprocity maps and border traps had a clear message coming from the top. This bill isn't a talking point anymore, it's a priority, and right behind that endorsement came the Judiciary Committee's vote, 18-9, a margin that reminded everyone this wasn't theater. This was movement. This was real momentum, the kind that forces Congress to react instead of stalling until the news cycle moves on. Then came the letter that rattled the remaining holdouts, the one signed by 24 attorneys general representing nearly half the states in this country. These are the people who actually enforce laws on the ground, who see what happens when the patchwork fails, who watch innocent people get hit with criminal charges because they crossed a line on a map that didn't come with a warning sign. That kind of unified pressure doesn't happen by accident. It happens when the system has failed so badly for so long that the people responsible for making it work can't defend it anymore. And that's exactly where we are right now. H.R. 38 isn't just a bill sitting in committee. It's the center of a national showdown, one that's accelerating faster than anyone expected, and the people who thought they could ignore it or slow walk it into oblivion are running out of room to maneuver. Now we get into the part that actually matters to your life, to the decisions you make every single day about how you travel, how you protect yourself, how you navigate a country that's supposed to guarantee your rights, but in practice treats them like a state-by-state lottery. We're talking about 10 specific rules, 10 provisions built into H.R. 38 that are designed to close loopholes, eliminate traps, and force states to stop treating your constitutional rights like they're negotiable. These rules are the engine of the entire bill. They're the reason gun owners, civil rights attorneys, sheriffs, and policy analysts are all watching what happens in the next few months with more tension than they've felt in years. If you want to understand what's really coming, if you want to separate the rumors from the reality, this is where it happens. And here's something you need to know right up front. Rule number 1 alone, just that single provision, would have saved thousands of Americans from felony charges over the past decade. So let's break this down, because these aren't abstract legal concepts. These are the rules that determine whether you end up in handcuffs or whether you make it home to your family. Rule number 1 ends the game of interstate roulette. Under H.R. 38, the permit sitting in your wallet doesn't shrink the moment you cross a state border. It expands. That single card becomes your nationwide credential, recognized the moment you step into any state that allows concealed carry. No more pulling over at gas stations to scan reciprocity maps on your phone. No more wondering if a wrong turn is going to put you in legal jeopardy. For years, for decades, gun owners have lived with 50 different interpretations of the same constitutional right. And this rule crushes that chaos and replaces it with one clear standard. If your home state trusts you to carry, the rest of the country has to respect it. One permit, one right, nationwide. Rule number 2 is for everyone living in constitutional carry states, the people who've been told by their state government that they don't need a permit to carry, but then find out that freedom evaporates the second they cross a border. Under H.R. 38, that freedom doesn't pause, it doesn't dim, it doesn't disappear, it stays with you. Your home state status remains intact no matter where you travel, and you're not treated like a stranger to your own rights just because the landscape changed. This wipes out the insane anxiety of wondering whether a different state is going to respect the legal framework your own state has fully embraced. Rule number 3 is the one that protects you during traffic stops, those high-pressure moments when one officer who doesn't recognize your permit can turn a simple interaction into an unpredictable legal nightmare. H.R. 38 rips that uncertainty out completely. If your permit is valid at home, officers in every state must treat it as legitimate. No confusion, no claiming your permit isn't accepted here, no improvised legal tests that you can fail just because of your zip code. This rule forces a uniform standard that officers have to follow, not interpret. And for travelers, for truckers, for daily carriers, it removes the dread of a roadside argument and replaces it with clarity. Rule number 4 flips the entire burden of proof, and this is massive. Under the old system, if another state questioned your permit, the burden fell on you immediately. You had to explain your paperwork, your training, your residency, your intent, all while facing the possibility of criminal charges. H.R. 38 destroys that dynamic. Now, if a prosecutor wants to challenge you, they have to prove you weren't qualified to carry, not suggest it, not speculate about it, prove it. This shift shuts down the lazy assumptions and bad faith prosecutions that have drained law-abiding carriers for years, and it signals to every jurisdiction that if they want to bring a case, they better have more than suspicion, because the era of making the gun owner defend everything is over. Rule number 5 changes behavior faster than any memo or policy speech ever could. In the past, even if you were arrested incorrectly while carrying legally, the financial nightmare fell entirely on you. The lawyers, the court appearances, the damage control, all of it out of your pocket. H.R. 38 rewires that pressure point completely. If law enforcement gets it wrong and arrests a lawful carrier, the agency has to pay for the fallout. Every court cost, every legal bill, every dollar spent proving the arrest never should have happened. This rule hits departments where they feel it in their budgets, and it sends a crystal clear message that careless enforcement has real consequences. When wrongful arrests start costing agencies money, the culture shifts, and lawful carriers finally get the respect they deserved all along. Rule number 6 eliminates the border trap. The nightmare scenario where you leave your driveway completely legal and cross into the next state only to instantly become a felon without changing a single thing about how you carry. H.R. 38 crushes that trap. Under this rule, your legal status doesn't reset when the pavement changes or the welcome sign flashes past your window. If your home state authorizes you to carry, that status stays with you as you travel, and states can no longer weaponize invisible borders against responsible people who are simply trying to get from point A to point B. This rule wipes away the fear that turned family trips, delivery routes, and long-haul trucking into legal minefields. Rule number 7 shows that H.R. 38 wasn't written in a vacuum. Even with nationwide permit recognition, Congress didn't bulldoze the rights of property owners. Private businesses, homes, and establishments still get to decide their own carry policies, and H.R. 38 doesn't override that. What it does stop is the sneaky tactic some states used, twisting private property rules into citywide bans where carriers were expected to magically know a restriction that was never even posted. H.R. 38 ends that confusion by returning authority to the people who actually own the property while stopping states from turning private property into a loophole for backdoor gun bans. Rule number 8 is the guardrail, the reminder that even with H.R. 38 reshaping how states recognize permits, federal gun-free zones remain untouched. Post offices, federal buildings, courthouses, protected zones, they all stay exactly as they are right now. H.R. 38 doesn't override federal authority, and understanding that boundary is part of carrying responsibly. What this rule really does is clean up the chaos at the state level so you're not guessing which cities recognize your permit, while reminding you that federal laws are a separate layer entirely. Think of this as the edge of reciprocity, the line that keeps the system stable while ensuring carriers don't walk into federal trouble assuming nationwide recognition applies everywhere. Rule number 9 is the backbone of the entire bill, because it destroys the idea that a permit magically loses legitimacy the moment you step out of your home state. H.R. 38 forces states to treat your home state qualification as valid, period. They don't have to copy your training system or adopt your background check process, but they can no longer pretend it doesn't exist. For decades, this inconsistency created a nightmare where gun owners had to memorize which states respected their permit and which ones acted like it was worthless. H.R. 38 ends that patchwork. Your state determines your eligibility, and every other state must honor that decision. It turns your permit into a true nationwide credential, not a permission slip with a shrinking radius. And rule number 10 pulls its strength from a place lawmakers rarely look anymore: actual American history. H.R. 38 revives the original understanding written into the 1887 New Mexico territorial law, which openly protected the right of travelers to carry firearms for self-defense while moving from place to place. That wasn't a loophole. That wasn't a modern reinterpretation. That reflected how armed travel was viewed in a country where people routinely crossed long distances with no guarantee of safety. Rule number 10 forces states to recognize that historical foundation and protects modern travelers from being stripped of their rights simply for being on the move. It reconnects gun law to its roots, reinforcing that self-defense isn't tied to geography. It follows the person. And once this rule goes active, states can no longer treat travel as the moment where rights evaporate. If these rules sound dramatic, it's only because the real stories behind them are even worse. Nothing exposes the insanity of the broken system better than what happened to people who thought they were following the law right up until the law turned on them. Take Shanine Allen, a working mom from Pennsylvania. She passed the background checks, held a valid permit, carried responsibly. But the moment she crossed into New Jersey for a birthday party, everything changed. One honest sentence during a traffic stop, one admission that she had a firearm in the car, pushed her into felony charges that threatened her job, her freedom, her entire future. Her crime wasn't violence, it wasn't recklessness, it wasn't misconduct, it was crossing a border. Then you have the long-haul truckers, men like David McCoy and Jeffrey Johnson, who spend nearly every day on the road, often through dangerous regions where they're vulnerable, where they're targets. Their permits were valid at home, but worthless the moment their route passed through Minnesota. A rule book written decades ago left them unprotected, legally exposed, facing criminal charges for simply doing their jobs. These aren't technical glitches in the system. These are traps, deliberate or not, that ordinary Americans fall into every single year. And this is exactly why the new pistol rules exist, to stop turning law-abiding citizens into accidental criminals just because they had the audacity to cross a state line. Whenever national reciprocity comes up, the same talking points get recycled as if nobody has bothered to check them in years. The loudest one is the states' rights argument. Critics insist that each state should control who carries within its borders, that this is a fundamental principle of federalism. But here's the problem with that argument. Nobody makes this claim about driver's licenses. Nobody makes it about marriage licenses. Nobody makes it about vehicle registrations or professional credentials. Those things move freely across state lines without anyone panicking about sovereignty or local control. But the moment the topic turns to self-defense, to the Second Amendment, the rules suddenly change, and states start acting like they need to protect their citizens from people who've already been vetted and approved by another state government. Then comes the claim that some permits are too weak, that stricter states shouldn't have to accept standards from places with looser requirements. But the numbers tell a completely different story. Permit holders are among the most law-abiding people in the entire country. Their conviction rates are far below the general public, even lower than many professional groups that cross state lines without anyone questioning their credentials. These are people who've already passed background checks, who've followed training requirements, who've maintained spotless records. Suggesting they pose a threat doesn't match any real-world data. It's fear dressed up as policy. And finally, critics lean on vague safety warnings, ominous predictions that somehow nationwide reciprocity will lead to more violence, more danger, more chaos. But decades of statistics show no wave of crime tied to responsible gun carriers. The danger isn't the people following the law. The danger is the confusion, the border traps, the inconsistent rules that punish ordinary citizens while doing absolutely nothing to stop actual criminals. These myths collapse the moment you compare them to reality, and H.R. 38 exposes that gap completely. If you really want to understand why these new pistol rules stand on solid legal ground, you have to look backward, far past today's political arguments, into the historical record that courts actually rely on when everything gets stripped down to facts. And once you do, the objections from strict states don't just weaken, they collapse entirely. For most of America's early history, travelers weren't restricted more than residents. They were often given extra freedom because moving from place to place carried real risk. The clearest example came in 1887 when the New Mexico territorial government wrote a law that explicitly protected a traveler's right to carry firearms while on the road. That wasn't theory. That wasn't abstract constitutional philosophy. That was written by people who lived just decades after the Constitution's creation, people far closer to the founders than any modern policymaker. And here's the part opponents can't explain away. Permit systems didn't even exist in the United States until 1911. That's more than a century after the Second Amendment was ratified. So when states claim their modern restrictions represent tradition, when they argue that limiting carry rights is rooted in historical practice, the actual record says the opposite. Under the current legal test used by courts, history isn't a suggestion. It's the scoreboard. And history sides with nationwide carry, not with the patchwork restrictions that didn't appear until the 20th century. When H.R. 38 started gaining serious traction, some law enforcement groups rushed to raise alarms, to warn about confusion and danger and enforcement nightmares. But when you strip away the noise, only a few concerns actually hold any weight. The International Association of Chiefs of Police argues that out-of-state permits will confuse officers during traffic stops, claiming there's no reliable way to verify them quickly. But anyone who's seen a modern patrol car knows this concern isn't rooted in technology. Officers already run out-of-state license plates, check for suspended licenses, pull up warrants, verify federal alerts, all of it in seconds. If a system can verify a car registered 1,200 miles away, it can verify a carry permit too. That said, there is a genuine concern on the ground, and it's about inconsistency. Different permit formats, different expiration layouts, different training expectations. It creates hesitation during high-pressure moments, and that hesitation can be dangerous for everyone involved. H.R. 38 doesn't ignore that reality. It creates a unified baseline so officers know what they're looking at instead of guessing. The fear isn't really about danger. It's about clarity. And these rules finally provide it. Meanwhile, as momentum builds behind the new pistol rules, several blue states are already gearing up for resistance, not loudly, but through quiet legal preparation happening behind the scenes right now. Attorneys general in New York, California, New Jersey, and Massachusetts are drafting challenges aimed at slowing or blocking H.R. 38 the moment it becomes law. Their argument is simple. They don't want their strict standards forced to match states with broader carry laws. Expect lawsuits claiming state sovereignty, enforcement conflicts, rushed attempts to tighten local restrictions before the federal framework takes effect. They might stall the rollout. They might create confusion in the early months. But they can't stop the nationwide shift that's already underway. Here's the truth most people aren't seeing yet. H.R. 38 isn't gaining traction by luck or by accident. The timing is what's pushing it forward. With Republicans holding strong influence in Congress and several moderate Democrats quietly signaling they won't die on this hill, the political math finally lines up in a way it didn't just a few years ago. Add to that a Supreme Court that has already shown repeatedly it favors a strict originalist reading of the Second Amendment, and you've got a rare moment where political momentum and judicial momentum are pointing in the same direction. Lawmakers know that this year, that February 2026 and the months ahead are the window when nationwide carry becomes not just popular, but expected. Voters are paying closer attention than they used to. Courts are clearing obstacles faster than anyone anticipated, and the country is tired of the patchwork, tired of watching good people get caught in legal traps for trying to exercise their rights. If H.R. 38 is going to cross the finish line, if it's going to become the law that reshapes gun rights in America, this window we're in right now is the one built for it. The question isn't whether the momentum exists. The question is whether it can hold long enough to force this through before the political landscape shifts again. And right now, in February 2026, that momentum is stronger than it's been in decades. These rules aren't some far-off political theory anymore. They're already shaping the way gun owners move, travel, and prepare for what's coming. If you've got a valid permit, these rules signal a future where crossing a border no longer feels like stepping into a legal minefield. If you live in a constitutional carry state, the path toward nationwide recognition is clearer than it's ever been. And if you've ever worried about mismatched state laws or surprise restrictions that turn a family trip into a potential felony, these new protections are closing those gaps one by one. The ripple effect isn't theoretical. The people closest to the ground are already shifting their plans. Firearms manufacturers are increasing production on popular carry pistols. Holster companies are expanding inventory because they see a surge coming once nationwide recognition becomes real. Sheriffs in pro-Second Amendment states are quietly updating internal guidance so deputies know how to handle out-of-state permits without hesitation. And carriers themselves, especially truckers and frequent travelers, are adjusting routes, reviewing their training, preparing for a future where their permit finally works everywhere they go. That's where we are right now, standing at the edge of a shift that gun owners have waited decades to see. This moment isn't hype. This is history being written in real time. H.R. 38 is reshaping how Americans carry, how they travel, how they defend themselves and their families. And the momentum from this moment forward into the rest of 2026 is only getting stronger. The question is whether you're paying attention, whether you're prepared, whether you understand what's at stake when the entire framework changes. Because ready or not, the new pistol rules are coming, and they're coming faster than anyone thought possible.